All right, welcome back again, loyal listeners. Those of you on a journey through the lore of Warcraft, or just interested in a book on tape, we've got the War of the Ancients trilogy, which is the first book is the Well of Eternity. We're on the 18th chapter here. All right, let's just get right into it. Stay a while and listen to chapter 18. Manaroth was pleased, and that pleased Lord Xavius. It is good, then, the Night Elf asked the Celestial Commander. So much hinged on everything going as planned. Manaroth nodded his heavy tusked head, his wings stretched and folded in satisfaction.
Yes, very good. Sargeras will be pleased.
Sargeras. Again the Celestial Commander had uttered the true name of the Great One. Xavius's magical eyes burned bright as he savored it. Sargeras. We will work the portal the moment that the spell is set in place. First will come the host. Then when all is made ready, my lord himself. Hakar approached, the much subdued Houndmaster falling on one knee before Manaroth.
Forgive this interruption, but one of my hunters has returned.
Only one.
So it seems.
And what have you learned from it?
Manaroth loomed over his counterpart, making the Houndmaster seem smaller and smaller.
They found two with the scent of otherness that the Lord Night Elf spoke of, plus one of his own kind with them. But in the hunt they also fell afoul of a being of power, great power.
For the first time, Manaroth displayed a slight hint of uncertainty. Xavius noted carefully the reaction, wondering what could disturb so wondrous a being.
Not.
Hakar quickly shook his head.
I think not. Perhaps with a touch of their power. Perhaps a guardian left behind.
The pair spoke of something significant, but what the counselor could not say. Taking a risk, he interrupted.
Is there a description of this last creature?
Aye. Hakar held out one hand, palm up. Above his palm, there suddenly burst to life a tiny image. It moved violently and often lost focus, but revealed by bits and pieces an almost full view of the one in question.
Seen through the eyes of the fell beast, an antlered entity as tall as one of the fell god.
Lord Xavius frowned.
The legend is true, then. The forest lord is real.
You know this creature, Manaroth demanded.
Ancient myth speaks of the forest lord, the demigod Cenarius. He is said to be the child of the Mother Moon.
Nothing more, then.
The tusked mouth twisted into a grim smile.
He will be dealt with.
To Hakar, he commanded.
Show the others.
The Houndmaster quickly obeyed, revealing a green-skinned brute of warrior, a young night elf, and an odd fire-haired figure clad in hooded garments.
A curious trio,
Xavius remarked. Manaroth nodded.
The warrior shows much promise. I would see more of his kind, learn their potential.
Such a beast, surely not. He's more grotesque than a dwarf.
The winged figure did not argue, instead recalling the last of the threesome.
A spindly creature with wary eyes, a creature of magic, I think. Almost like a night elf.
He got off Xavius's new protest.
But not.
Dismissing the Hakar's images, the huge reptilian limbs maneuvered through the chamber as Manaroth contemplated what he had learned.
More fell beasts could be sent to find them,
suggested the Houndmaster.
But with Felgod behind, this time the objective will be capture.
Capture,
echoed both the counselor and the Houndmaster. The deep-set eyes narrowed more.
They must be studied, their weaknesses and strengths assessed in case there are others.
Can the Felgod be spared?
There will soon be many, many more. Lord Night Elf, are your highborn prepared?
Studying the sorcerer, Xavius bowed his head.
They are ready to do what they must to see the glorious fulfillment of our dream, the cleansing of the world of all that is.
The world will be cleansed, Lord Night Elf. You may trust to that.
Manaroth glanced at Hakar.
I leave the hunt to you, Houndmaster. Do not fail again.
Keeping low, Hakar backed away.
And now, Lord Night Elf,
the towering being continued, gaze turning to the place of casting.
Let us begin the molding of your people's future.
Manaroth's wings flexed as they always seemed to do when he contemplated something agreeable to him.
A future I promise you that they cannot possibly even imagine.
Deathwing soared over the landscape, breathing fire everywhere. Screams came from every direction around Krasis, but he could not find any of those who pleaded for his aid. Trapped in his tiny mortal form, he scampered over the burning earth like a field rat, trying to keep from being engulfed, while in vain he sought to help the dying. Suddenly a dark shadow covered the area over which he ran, and a thundering voice mocked,
Well, well, and what little morsel is this?
Huge claws twice the size of the dragon mage encircled Krasis, trapping him. With no effort whatsoever, they dragged him into the sky and turned him to face the malevolent visage of Deathwing.
Why, it's only a bit of old dragon meat. Corial straws. You've been around the lesser races much too long. Their weakness has rubbed off on you.
Krasis tried to cast a spell, but from his mouth emerged not words, but tiny bats. Deathwing inhaled, drawing the bats mercilessly into the hot, gaping maw. The black behemoth swallowed.
Not much of a treat. I doubt you'll be any better, but you're already going to waste, so I might as well finish you off.
He raised the flailing figure above his gullet.
Besides, you're of no use to anyone anyway.
The claws released Krasis, but as he plummeted into Deathwing's mouth, things changed. Deathwing and the burning landscape vanished. Krasis suddenly floated in the midst of a horrendous sandstorm, spun around and around by its ever more turbulent forces. A dragon's head formed in the midst of the storm. At first, Krasis thought that the black beast had followed him, determined not to let his snack escape. Then another head identical to the first appeared, followed by another and another, until an endless horde filled Krasis' view. Corial straws, they moaned simultaneously over and over. Corial straws. It occurred to Krasis then that the heads had a different shape to them from Deathwing's, and that each had formed from the sandstorm itself. Stormu? We are stretched through all, the Timeless One managed. We see all. Krasis waited, knowing that Nosdormu spoke as his efforts permitted him. All ends lead to nothing. All ends. Nothing? What did he mean? Did he indicate that all the mage had feared had come to pass, that the future had been eradicated? But one. Krasis seized hold of the tiny ray of hope. Tell me, what path? What do I do? In answer, the dragon heads changed. The snout shrank and the heads elongated, becoming more human. No, not human. Elven. A night elf? Was this someone he should fear, or someone he should seek? He tried to ask Nosdormu, but then the storm grew wild, mad. The winds tore apart the faces, scattering the grains of sand everywhere. Krasis tried to protect his body as sand ripped at his flesh, even through his garments. He screamed. And sat up a moment later, his mouth still open in a silent scream. My queen, he is with us again. Gradually, Krasis' mind returned to reality. The nightmare involving Deathwing and the subsequent vision of Nosdormu still wreaked havoc with his thoughts, but he was at last able to focus enough to realize that he lay in the egg chamber where he and Alexstrasza had first spoken. The Queen of Life herself looked down in grave concern at him. To his right, his younger self also watched with worry. Your spell has passed, Alexstrasza quietly inquired. This time he was determined that she would know regardless of the consequences. Nosdormu's frightening words indicated that the path to the future already had all but shut. What more trouble then would it be if he told her of Neltharion's madness and the horror the Black Dragon would cause? But once more, when Krasis tried to speak of the fiend, the vertigo nearly did him in. It was all he could do to keep conscious. Too soon, cautioned Alexstrasza. You need more rest. He needed much more than that. He needed the sinister and subtle spell which the Earth Warder had evidently cast upon him removed, but clearly none of the aspects had even recognized his condition as one caused by sorcery. In all his incarnations, Deathwing had always been the most cunning of evils. Unable to do anything about the Black Dragon, Krasis' mind drifted to the Night Elf, whose features Nosdormu had attempted to show him. He recalled the ones who had attacked Ronan and him, but none had looked at all like this new figure. How far are we from the land of the Night Elves? Krasis asked, then touched his mouth in surprise when he realized that the words had come out with no trouble. Apparently, Neltharion's handiwork only involved the dragon himself, not any other matter of importance. We can take you there soon enough, his mate replied, but what of the matter of which you spoke? This still concerns that matter, but my course has changed, I believe. I believe I have just been contacted by the Timeless One, who tried to tell me something. His younger self found this too much. You had nightmares, delusions. We heard you moan several times.
It is doubtful that the aspect of time would reach out to you. Alistraza, perhaps, but not you.
No, corrected the Red Queen. I believe he may have the truth of it, Coriel Straz. If he says that Nosdormu touched his thoughts, I suspect he states fact.
I bow to your wisdom, my love.
I must go to the Night Elves, Krasis insisted. With Coriel Straz nearby and no intention of mentioning Neltharian's duplicity, his condition had improved much. There is one I seek. I hope I am not already too late. The female Leviathan tilted her head to the side, her eyes seeking within Krasis's own.
Is all you told me before still truth? All of it?
It is, but I fear there is much more. The dragons. All dragons will be needed for a struggle. But with Nosdormu absent, a consensus cannot be reached. The others will not agree to anything. You must convince them to go against tradition. He forced himself to his feet. They could very well be all that stands between the world and oblivion. And with that he told both all he could recall of the horror of the Burning Legion. They listened to his tales of blood, of decimation, of soulless evil. Even the two dragons shook as he regaled them with the atrocities. By the time he was finished, Krasis had told more than enough for them to see his fear. But even then Alistraza said, they may still not decide. We have watched the world, but we leave its progress in the hands of the younger races. Even Neltharion, who is warder of the earth itself, prefers to leave it that way. He so much desired to tell her of Neltharion, but even thinking that made his head swim. With a reluctant nod, Krasis said, I know you will do what you must, and you must do what you will. Go to the Night Elves and seek your answer if you think it will help the situation. She looked up at her consort. After a moment's consideration, the Queen added, I ask that you go with him, Coriel Straz. Will you do it? The male lowered his head in respect.
If you ask, I am only too glad to oblige.
I also ask that you follow his lead, my consort. Trust me when I say that he has wisdom which will be of value to you. It was not entirely clear from his reptilian visage whether or not Coriel Straz believed the last, but he nodded to that too. Night has fallen, Alistraza informed Krasis. Will you wait until light? The dragon maid shook his head. I have already waited far too long as it is. The first to bear the clan designation of Ravencrest had looked upon the huge granite formation atop the high and treacherous mount. He had remarked to his companion how its stocky formation resembled a piece from a chessboard, a rook colored black. That huge dark birds constantly circled about the formation and even nested atop it was taken as a sign that this was a special place, a place of power. For more than a generation, and the generations of night elves were longer than those of most races, servants of the Ravencrest line had continually carved out the clan's stronghold, gradually building from solid rock a fortress like none seen among their kind. Black Rook Hold, as it quickly became known, was an ominous, uncolored place which spread its influence over much of the Night Elf realm, becoming second only to the palace. When conflict arose between the Night Elves and the Dwarves, it was the power of Black Rook Hold that tipped the balance. Those of the clan of Ravencrest became the honored of the throne, and the blood of both sides intermingled. If the highborn who served Ajara were jealous of any others of their race, it had to be those of the Ebony Fortress. Windows had been carved out on the top floors of the hold, but the only way to enter was by the twin iron gates located not at the base of the structure, but at the very bottom of the hill. The solid gates were sealed shut and well guarded. Only fools would have thought to enter there without permission. But for the present Lord Ravencrest, those gates had opened readily. They had also opened for his 3 prisoners, one of whom knew the stories of Blackrock Hold and grew worried. Malfurion had never thought that he would enter the Dark Hold, especially under such dire conditions. Worse, he could never have imagined his twin being the main reason for his having to do so. In the course of their journey, he had learned that it was Illidan, somehow suddenly associated with Lord Ravencrest, who had detected Ronan's spell. With Malfurion's brother to aid him, the Night Elven commander had ridden out with a full force, determined this time to capture any invaders. He had been most pleased to see Brox, and quite puzzled to see Illidan's twin. In a chamber lit by glittering emerald crystals, positioned high in each of the 5 corners, Lord Ravencrest inspected his catch. The commander sat upon a chair carved from the same stone as his hold. The chair stood upon a dais, also stone, giving Ravencrest the ability to look down on the trio even while seated. Armed soldiers lined the walls of the chamber, while others surrounded Malfurion and his comrades. Ravencrest himself was flanked by his senior officers, each of whom stood with his helm in the crook of one arm. At the noble's immediate right waited Illidan. Present also were 2 high-ranking members of the Moon Guard. They were a late addition to the proceedings, having arrived at Blackrock Hold just as the commander had brought his prisoners to the gates. The Moon Guard, too, had detected Ronan's spell, but their spies had informed them of Ravencrest's party before there had been any chance to send out searches of their own. The sorcerers were not at all pleased by the noble's actions, nor were they pleased with Illidan's presence. he being an unsanctioned spellcaster in their eyes.
Once again, my Lord Ravencrest,
Began the thinner elder of the two moon guard, an officious figure by the name of Latosius.
I must request that these outsiders be turned over to us for proper questioning.
You've already had the Beastman and lost him. He was to come to me anyway. This simply shortens the procedure.
The noble eyed the three again.
There's more here than what we see on the surface. Illidan, I would hear from you.
Malfurion's brother looked slightly ill at ease, but he answered strongly, Yes, my lord, he is my brother.
That much is as obvious as night and day.
He studied the captive twin.
I know something of you, lad, just as I know something of your brother. Your name is Malfurion, yes? Yes, my lord.
You rescued this creature.
I did.
The commander leaned forward.
And you've an excellent reason why, one that would excuse this heinous act. I doubt you would believe me, my lord.
Oh, I can come to believe many things, young one, Lord Ravencrest replied calmly, tugging lightly on his beard.
If they're spoken in honesty, can you do that?
What other choice did Malfurion have? Sooner or later, through one method or another, they would pluck the truth from him.
I'll try.
And so he told them of his studies under Cenarius, which immediately raised doubtful brows. He explained his reoccurring dreams and how the demigod had taught him to walk in the world of the subconscious. Most of all, Malfurion described the disconcerting forces that had drawn him to, of all places, Zinajari and the palace of the Night Elf's beloved queen. They listened as he told of the well itself and the turbulence that the sorcerers within the palace had stirred up. He painted for Ravencrest, the Moon Guard, and the others the vision of the tower and what he sensed went on inside. The one thing he did not mention, assuming that from his story it would be obvious, was his fear that Queen Ajara sanctioned everything. Ravencrest did not comment on his story, instead looking to the Moon Guard.
Has your order noticed any such trouble?
The elder sorcerer answered.
The well is more turbulent than usual, and that could be from misuse. We have not monitored any such activity from Zinajari, but then such an incredible fiction as this.
Yes, it is incredible, the bearded commander glanced up at Illidan.
What say you concerning your brother?
He's never been one for delusions, my lord. Illidan would not look at Malfurion as to whether it's the truth.
Indeed. Still, I wouldn't put it past Lord Xavius and the High Board to instigate some devilment without her knowledge. They act as if the Queen is their prized possession and no one else has a right to her.
Even by the Moon Guard, this was greeted with nods. The arrogance of the Lord Councillor and those surrounding Ajara and the palace was well known.
If I may,
Latosius interjected.
Once we've settled matters here, I will pass on word to the heads of our order. They will put into motion surveillance of the Highborn and their activities.
I should be most interested in that. Young Malfurion, your story, on the assumption that it is for the most part truth, explains some of your actions, but how does that fit into the freeing of a prisoner of your people? A most serious crime.
I can perhaps answer that better, Ronan suddenly said. Malfurion was not so sure it was a good thing that the other outsider spoke. Night Elves were not so tolerant of other races, and although Ronan had some vague resemblance to his kind, he still might as well have been a troll for all the good it would do him. But Ravencrest appeared willing to listen, if nothing else. He waved a negligent hand toward the hooded wizard. In my land, a land not far from where he's from, explained Ronan, nodding toward Brox, a strange magical anomaly opened up. My people sent me, and Brox's sent him. We both discovered it separately, and were drawn unwilling through it. He ended one place, I another.
And how does this pertain to young Malfurion?
He believes, as I do, that this anomaly was caused by the spellwork mentioned.
That would be some cause for alarm, commented the senior Moon Guard dubiously. The green-skinned creature hardly seems what one would send to study a creation of sorcery or magic. My war chief commanded I go, retorted Brox with a defiant snarl. I went.
I cannot speak for the orcs, Ronan answered, but I am certainly adept at such a study. His eyes, so different from those of the Night Elves, dared the Moon Guard to deny him. After a pause, both sorcerers nodded their agreement. Malfurion realized that they did not know what exactly Ronan was, but they recognized one versed in the arts. Indeed, it was likely for that reason that the wizard had been allowed to speak at all.
Perhaps I'm growing old, but I'm inclined to believe much of all this.
This admission from Lord Ravencrest drew some looks from his officers and sent a wave of relief through Malfurion. The commander took their story to heart.
We remain undecided, Latosius declared. Such information cannot be taken on faith alone. There must still be an inner interrogation.
The noble's brow rose. Did I say otherwise? He snapped his fingers, and the guard seized Malfurion tightly by the arms, dragging him toward the dais.
Now I would like to test the faith I've placed in my new sorcerer. Illidan, we must ascertain the absolute truth, however distasteful that might seem to you. I trust I can rely on you to prove to us that all your brother says is true.
The pony-tailed night elf swallowed, then looked beyond Malfurion. My brother's word I trust, but I can't say the same for the robed creature, my lord. Illidan was trying to keep from having to use his powers on his brother by instead focusing on an outsider. While Malfurion appreciated that concern, he did not like the idea of Ronan Orbrock suffering in his place.
Lord Commander, this is absurd.
The senior sorcerer marched up to the dais, eyeing Illidan with contempt.
An unsanctioned spellcaster who is the brother of one of the prisoners. Any questioning will be suspect.
He turned on Malfurion, silver eyes narrowed menacingly at the younger night elf.
In accordance with the laws set down at the very dawn of our civilization in matters magical, it is the responsibility and right of the Moon God to oversee all such interrogations.
He advanced, coming within arm's reach of the prisoner. Malfurion tried not to show his anxiety. Against the physical threats of Blackwood Hold, he hoped his druidic training would allow him to survive, but the delving of a sorcerer into his mind threatened him much more. Such a questioning could leave his body whole, but his brain so shattered that he might never recover. Illidan leapt down from the dais. My lord, I'll interrogate my brother. Whatever his twin would do to him, Malfurion suspected that Illidan would be much more careful in his approach than the Moon Guard, who only wanted answers. Malfurion looked at Lord Ravencrest, hoping that the noble would accept Illidan's offer. But the master of Blackrock Hold only leaned back against his chair, stating, The laws shall be followed. He is yours, Moon God, but only if you do the questioning here and now. That is agreed. Consider in your work that he may be telling the truth. It was the closest Malfurion guessed Ravencrest would come to trying to preserve Illidan's twin from harm. First and foremost, the bearded commander was protector of the realm. If that cost the life or mind of one night elf, then the sacrifice had to be made.
The truth will be known, was all the sorcerer would answer. To the guards he commanded, Hold his head straight.
One of the armored figures positioned Malfurion for the Moon Guard. The robed figure reached up and touched the struggling prisoner's temples with his index fingers. A shock ran through Malfurion, and he was certain that he screamed. His thoughts swirled around, old memories rising to the surface unbidden. Yet each one was swiftly thrust back down as what felt like a clawed hand dug into his mind, seeking ever deeper.
Struggle not,
commanded a harsh voice that had to be that of Latosius.
Release your secrets, and it will go the better for you.
Malfurion wanted to, but did not know how. He thought of what he had already told the gathering and tried to project that forward. Of Ajara's possible duplicity, Malfurion still resisted revealing. It would lessen his chances of ever being believed if that suspicion leaked free. Then just as suddenly as the intrusive probe had burrowed into his thoughts, it ceased. It did not withdraw, it did not gradually fade away, it simply ceased. Malfurion's legs buckled. He would have fallen if not for the guards holding him. Gradually he became aware of shouts, some in disbelief, others in consternation. One of the voices, most strident, sounded like that of the Elder Moon Guard.
It's outrageous, someone else cried out. Surely not the Queen. Never.
He had let slip his ultimate fear. Malfurion cursed his feeble mind. Barely had the questioning begun, and he had already failed himself, failed Cenarius' teaching.
"'Tis the Highborn, it has to be. This is Xavius' doing," another voice insisted. "He has committed evil against his own kind," agreed the first.
What were they talking about? Although Malfurion's head refused to clear, he still felt certain that something was not right about the shouted conversation. The speakers were too excited, reacting too adamantly to his beliefs. He was only one night elf and not even of high rank. Why would his vague suspicions throw them into growing panic? "Let me see to him," a voice said. Malfurion felt the guards hand him over to a single person who lowered him gently to the floor. Hands touched the sides of his face, lifting it up. Through bleary eyes, Malfurion met the gaze of his brother. "Why didn't you give in immediately?" Illidan muttered. 2 hours? Do you still have a mind left?"
2 hours?
Noting the response, Illidan breathed easier. "Praise Elune! After you spouted that nonsense about the Queen, that old fool was determined to rip everything out of your head, regardless of the cost. If not for his spell failing, suddenly he probably would have left you an empty husk. They haven't forgotten the loss of their brethren and blame you for it."
"His spell failed?"
That hardly made sense. Malfurion's interrogator had been a most senior sorcerer.
"All of their spells have failed," Illidan persisted.
"After he lost control of the first, he tried another, and when that didn't work, his companion attempted a third with no success." Malfurion still did not understand. What his twin hinted at sounded as if both of the Moon Guard had lost their powers.
"They can't cast?"
"No, and my own powers feel muted." He leaned next to Malfurion's ear. "I think I have some control, but barely. It's as if we've been cut off from the well." The commotion continued to grow. He heard Lord Ravencrest demand if the Moon Guard still maintained contact with their brethren, to which one of the sorcerers admitted that the ever-present link had been severed. The noble then asked of his own followers if any still retained their own skills, however slight. No one answered in the affirmative.
"It's begun,"
Malfurion whispered without thinking. His twin frowned. "What's that? What has?" He looked past Illidan, recalling the violent forces carelessly summoned by those in the tower. He saw again the lack of regard for what such spellwork might do to those beyond the palace walls. I don't know, Alfurion finally told his brother. I wish by the Mother Moon I did, but I just don't. Beyond Illidan, he saw the concerned countenances of Brox and Ronan. Whether or not they understood as he did, both looked as if they had shared his growing fear.
I only know that whatever it may be, it's begun.
All over the realm of the Night Elves, all over the continent of Kalimdor, thousands of others sensed the loss. The well had been cut off from them. The power that they had so blithely wielded was all but gone. A sense of alarm swiftly grew, for it was as if someone had reached up and just stolen the moon. Those living nearest to the palace naturally turned to their queen, calling on Ajara for guidance. They waited before the bolted gates, gathering in greater and greater numbers. Above, the sentries watched blank-faced, neither moving to open the gates nor calling down to calm the growing crowd. Only after more than half the night had passed, most of the city had emptied out into the area before the palace did the gates finally open. The people poured forward, relieved. They were certain that Ajara had finally come out in response to their pleas. But what emerged from within the palace walls was not the queen, nor was it anything ever imagined in the Night Elf world. And so fell the first victims of the Burning Legion. Bum, bum, bum. All right, I think we are finally now, obviously, here we go, is where the dark period probably is going to begin, where the Burning Legion just starts wreaking havoc. And it looks like we have some potential allies, Blackrock Hold and the Dragonflight. But also more potential evil with Deathwing. All right, guys, another episode in the pipes, 5x5. Thank you for listening. As always, your time, your presence, your ears, they mean a lot to me. I'll see you guys on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.